No one's coming. Just bury the old woman for now.
She's just a poor daughter-in-law. Why stay and take care of a bedridden old woman? So stupid. Her husband already left, yet she's still staying. She died that poor, and what was she even worth? If living is what you want, then go.
Before anyone mocked her for staying, she had already made her choice. Amina married at 19 in age when other girls still sat in front of their homes, braiding each other's hair, giggling over a secret glance from someone passing by on the village road. But Amina stood beneath a faded tarpaulin set up hastily in the yard, wearing a simple cream-colored wedding dress. In her hands was a small bouquet, quickly tied together from green leaves and wildflowers. That day, the Nigerian sun burned fiercely. Heat beat down on the tin roofs, making them crackle, while red dust clung to her heels, as if to remind her that from this moment on, her life would be bound to the earth, to sweat, to all the quiet things no one ever spoke of. Yusuf looked at her with gentle but weary eyes. He was not a wealthy man, nor one gifted with flowery words. He simply held her hand tightly, as though he too feared it might slip away, afraid that the little faith he had left in life would shatter like a bowl dropped onto hard ground. After the wedding, Amina stepped into Yusuf's house as though stepping into a story she had never read the opening lines of. The house was small. The mud walls were cracked in places, the cement floor stained and uneven. In the corner of the room, on a low bed covered with a faded cloth, Mama Zainab lay motionless. Her eyes were open, but her gaze seemed to drift somewhere far away. Her body was so thin that her shoulder bones pressed sharply beneath her clothing. Her hands were nothing but skin over bone. The smell of medicated oil, herbal smoke, and dampness from long days of lying still blended together, creating a scent Amina had never known until that moment. Yusuf was Mama Zainab's only son. People said she had once been the strongest woman in the village, hauling water, carrying firewood, standing in the marketplace arguing fearlessly with men who tried to cheat her. Then a stroke struck like a hammer. From that day on, she lay paralyzed. Half her body would not move. Even her voice faded, sometimes reduced to nothing more than breath. In her early days as a daughter-in-law, Amina felt lost. She sat by the bed, looking at her mother-in-law, unsure where to begin. Yusuf moved constantly, trying to care for his mother while taking on odd jobs around the village to earn money for medicine. But there was never enough. Poverty did not arrive like a storm you could brace for. It came like dust every day, settling on skin, on hair, even on dreams. Just a few months after the wedding, Yusuf sat across from Amina beneath the dim glow of an oil lamp. Wings slipped through the gaps in the roof, whispering softly, as if someone was speaking in secret. He stared at his calloused hands and sighed. "Lagos needs workers," he said quietly but firmly. "I'll go there, I'll send money home." Amina looked at him. She did not ask how long, she feared the answer. She did not grab his shirt to pull him back, knowing that holding a poor man in place only tightened the grip of hunger. She simply nodded and forced a smile. "Go," she said gently. "I'll stay and take care of Mama." Yusuf held her hand. His palm was hot, trembling slightly. He leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, like a promise he could not say out loud. "I'll send money home," he repeated, as if saying it enough times might make it true. The next morning, Yusuf left. He slung a small bag over his shoulder and walked out the gate as though stepping out of his own life. Red dust rose behind his feet. Amina stood watching until he became nothing more than a small dot, then disappeared into the long road leading out of the village. At first, Amina believed. Whenever she heard a motorcycle in the distance, she looked up. Whenever someone returned from the market, she asked if there was any news, any message. Each night, she sat beside Mama Zainab's bed and spoke to her as though speaking to herself. "Yusuf will send money," she said. "He won't forget." But the first week passed. Then the second, nothing came. The first month ended, still not a single coin. Amina began to understand what it meant to wait with no end in sight. It was not loud sadness. It was a quiet emptiness, like standing before a door that never opened, even though behind it lay the only thing that could save you. She watched the sack of rice in the corner grow lighter, watched Mama Zainab's medicine run low, watched the thin blanket on the bed grow dirtier, washed again and again without soap. And Amina stood up. Day after day, she walked miles to the market, asking to wash dishes for food stalls. Some days she was turned away too young, they said, too clumsy. Some days she was given mountains of dishes, then paid with a few coins tossed at her like crumbs to a sparrow. Amina never argued. She accepted them, lowered her head, and walked on. Some days she carried water for others. The weight bent her shoulders. The rope cut red lines into her forehead. The sun burned her back. Dust clung to her sweat in dark streaks. But whenever she thought of Mama Zainab lying at home, she pushed herself harder. Just a little more, she whispered. Just a little more. Buying medicine with those few coins hurt her the most, not because the money was small, but because of the way the sellers looked at her. She's still alive? They asked. Amina nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. You're still young, someone said. Don't bury your life beside someone who's about to die. Amina said nothing. She took the medicine and walked away faster, so she wouldn't have to hear any more. Night was when she was most exhausted. During the day, she could move, endure, pretend to be strong. At night, in the small house with only the sound of insects and an old woman's breathing, the truth collapsed in on her. She lit the oil lamp. The weak yellow light flickered in the wind, casting her shadow and Mama Zainab's onto the wall, two long, lonely shapes. She cleaned her mother-in-law with warm cloths, gentle as if afraid to cause pain. She turned her frail body to prevent sores. Sometimes Mama Zainab groaned softly, eyes closing as though swallowing pain whole. Each time, Amina bent close to her ear. Mama, I'm here, she whispered. I won't let you suffer. Some nights, Mama Zainab looked at Amina for a long time, as though trying to say something her voice could no longer carry. She lifted the one hand that still moved and grasped Amina's. The hand was cold and thin, but the grip held gratitude and fear. Under the flickering oil lamp, Mama Zainab whispered, her voice thin as thread. You can leave. I don't blame you. It wasn't a dismissal, it was an opening. A door one Amina could step through to live as a young woman again. To laugh, to be loved. To go to the market without counting every coin. It was as though Mama Zainab wanted to return the youth this sickbed had taken from her. Amina looked at her. In those aging eyes, she saw a sadness too deep to name. Perhaps Mama Zainab herself had once been abandoned. Perhaps she had heard people say, "Let her die already." Perhaps she had long grown used to being a burden. Amina swallowed her tears. She did not want to cry in front of her. But her throat tightened as if a stone had lodged inside. She squeezed her mother-in-law's hand tighter. And Amina shook her head, slowly, gently, but with absolute resolve. The relatives came. Not to help. They arrived like a poisoned wind, bringing with them the slap of worn sandals, mocking laughter, and the familiar, prying stares of people who only appear to make sure someone else is suffering more than they are. Amina heard their voices from beyond the gate. Their words tangled with the clucking of chickens, the sound of barefoot children running past, and the wind whipping through the palm trees behind the house. She remained seated beside the bed, holding a bowl of thin porridge. It was made with broken rice and more water than grain. She blew gently, then brought each small spoonful to Mama Zainab's lips. Her mother-in-law swallowed with effort, her throat dry, her eyes closed, as if trying to preserve the last fragments of dignity before the curiosity of the crowd. Outside, they gathered, but did not step inside, as though even entering would soil their feet. "She's really stupid," a woman's voice cut through the air, sharp as a blade. It was Auntie Rahila Yusuf's cousin, well known in the village for a mouth faster than her heart. "Staying behind with an old woman who's about to die," another voice chimed in, snickering. "If it were me, I'd have left long ago." Amina did not turn around. She kept blowing on the porridge, though her hand trembled from anger, from exhaustion, from having held too much inside for too long. Her husband's probably forgotten he even has a wife, a man said, chewing betel nut loudly. Lagos gives people plenty of reasons to forget. Laughter rippled through the group. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Not the noise of a marketplace, but the slow, repeated sting of needles piercing skin. Amina looked at Mama Zainab. She lay still, her frail hands resting atop the old blanket. She did not turn her face away. She heard everything. And that hurt Amina more than anything they said about her. Then someone whispered soft enough to seem private, but loud enough to slip into the room. Mama Zainab used to own land. But looking at her now, she must have sold it all. The words dropped like a heavy stone. Amina saw Mama Zainab's eyelids flutter shut. Her lashes trembled. She said nothing. But Amina heard the restrained sigh as though the old woman had swallowed a deep humiliation whole. Amina heard it all. She heard with the ears of someone long accustomed to contempt. She heard with the heart of someone still trying to believe there was kindness left in people. And she heard with the empty stomach of someone who had eaten so little that every word made her body feel lighter while making her soul heavier. She could have stood up, walked to the door, looked them straight in the face and said, "If you're so capable, come inside and take care of her for just one night." She could have told them about carrying water until her shoulders split, about selling her only scarf to buy medicine, about the nights she stayed awake while Mama Zainab writhed in pain. But she didn't, because Amina understood that sometimes answering back only made their laughter louder. And sometimes the only thing keeping her upright was silence. She never argued. She simply bent down and continued feeding spoonful after spoonful of thin porridge to the woman lying on the bed. Each spoonful that went in was an unspoken vow, "I am still here." Each time Mama Zainab managed to swallow, Amina felt as though she had won a small battle. As for the laughter outside, Amina let it pass like dust in the wind, though dust always clings. They lingered a while longer, just long enough to satisfy their curiosity, then slowly dispersed. Before leaving, Auntie Rahila tossed back one last sentence like throwing a stone into a well. "Don't say I didn't warn you. When she dies, don't expect anyone to help bury her." Amina did not respond. She gently closed the door as though afraid the sound might hurt the woman inside. But once the door shut, Amina leaned against it and closed her eyes. Her throat burned. A single tear fell, and she wiped it away quickly like brushing off a stain. That night it did not rain, but the wind was strong. The oil lamp swayed, its flame trembling as though about to die. Outside, distant dogs barked. Amina lay on a mat on the floor beside her mother-in-law's bed, her ears strained to catch every breath. Mama Zainab stirred. She could not sit up, but her lips quivered. Amina sprang to her feet and bent down at once. "Mama, Mama, where does it hurt?" Mama Zainab looked at her, her eyes red, not from physical pain, but from something else entirely. Amina noticed a wet streak on her wrinkled cheek. At first she thought it was sweat. Then another tear rolled down, slowly thick and heavy, like oil. That night, Mama Zainab cried. The sight terrified Amina more than any seizure had. She had grown used to tending her body, to medicine, to changing cloths, to the smell of sickness. But Mama Zainab's tears, those were something Amina did not know how to heal. "Mama," Amina whispered, placing her hand gently on the old woman's forehead. "Please don't cry. I'm here." Mama Zainab squeezed her hand. It was cold and weak, but the grip held tight like someone clutching a lifeline in open water. "Do you know," her voice broke, thin and trembling, "silence is sometimes the most powerful thing that kills." Amina froze. Mama Zainab wasn't speaking only of what had been said outside that day. She spoke like someone who had lived for years inside a room full of silence, who had heard loved ones, footsteps leaving without ever turning back. Like someone who had shared meals with people sitting across from her, who never once met her eyes. like someone who had lain motionless staring at the ceiling, waiting day after day for someone to ask, "Mama, are you in pain?" Amina looked at her mother-in-law, her heart tightening. Silence kills? The words echoed in her mind like scripture she did not yet understand. She wanted to ask, "Who are you talking about, Mama?" She wanted to ask, "Why do you say that?" She wanted to ask, "What happened before I came?" But Mama Zainab's eyes were too deep, too full of things long buried. Amina felt like a child standing before a locked door, hearing cries from inside without the key. She gently wiped away the tears, then bent down and kissed the fragile back of Mama Zainab's hand. "I'm here," Amina said like a prayer. Mama Zainab closed her eyes, but the tears continued to fall silent, soundless. The oil lamp flickered again, its light dimming and brightening, just like their lives. Amina sat still for a long time, listening to the wind outside and the breathing of the old woman on the bed. In her mind, the words kept repeating, drilling deeper like a needle. Silence is sometimes the most powerful thing that kills. Amina didn't understand. A rainy morning. Rain in a Nigerian village does not fall like a lullaby. It falls as if the entire sky is being emptied at once, heavy, straight, and colder than usual. The drops slam against the old tin roof with sharp, rattling sounds, then stream off the edges of the house, splashing into the red earth and turning it into dark pools of mud. The air is thick with the smell of wet soil, rotting leaves, and wood smoke from someone nearby struggling to light a fire in the rain. Amina woke to the sound of her mother-in-law coughing, and then she realized, this morning, there was no coughing at all. The room was so silent that the rain outside seemed to strike directly against her ears. The oil lamp had gone out sometime after midnight. Only the gray light of the rainy morning seeped through the cracks in the door. Amina sat up suddenly on the mat on the floor, eyes wide, her heart pounding, as if she had dropped something precious and hadn't yet dared to look for it. "Mama," she called softly. No answer. Amina pushed herself up, her bare feet touching the icy floor. She stepped toward the bed and leaned close to Mama Zainab's gaunt face. Her eyes were closed. Her lashes were still. The familiar trembling of thin breaths was gone. Amina pressed her ear to the old woman's chest, just as she always did when Mama slept deeply. There was nothing. "Mama," Amina's voice broke, louder now, urgent. "Mama, it's me. Please answer me." She shook her gently, then harder. Then both her trembling hands rested on the old woman's shoulders, as if trying to pull her back toward life. But Mama Zainab did not respond. Amina reached for her mother-in-law's hand. The thin hand was cold. The sensation was like touching rainwater in the cold season, not painful at first, but seeping into bone and heart, stealing breath. Amina jerked her hand back as if burned. She stared at her own palm, then looked again at Mama Zainab's face. The same face, the same wrinkles. The same woman who had held her hand through long nights and whispered words Amina never fully understood. But now, she was silent forever. Amina stood frozen for a long moment, as if time might change its mind if she stayed still enough. Outside, the rain continued. She heard water running across the yard, chickens flapping their wings to escape the downpour. She even heard her own heart pounding inside her chest alone, unaccompanied. Then Amina knelt beside the bed. There was no loud wailing like in the stories people tell. Her tears fell silently hot, steady, unbroken. She took Mama Zainab's cold hand and pressed it against her cheek. "Mama," Amina whispered, her voice barely there. "I'm here. I'm still here." But Mama Zainab could no longer hear her. Amina wiped her face and stood up. She knew what had to be done. Poverty teaches people early how to prepare for death. It does not give them time to collapse for long. It forces them to stand even when their legs want to give way. She ran out into the rain, not stopping to cover her head. The rain struck her face, sharp and stinging. She ran to the nearest neighbor's house, Uncle Utch's, the old man who sometimes slipped her a yam when no one was watching. Uncle Utch," Amina pounded on the door. He opened it. When he saw Amina soaked through, her eyes red, he froze. "What happened, child?" Amina swallowed hard. She tried to speak, but her throat felt crushed. "Mama Zainab." She managed, then broke down. "Mama, she's gone." Uncle Utch sighed and lifted a hand to his forehead, as if in prayer. He didn't say much. He simply nodded and said, "I'll let people know." But the people he meant were not Mama Zainab's relatives. He knew them. Everyone did. Amina still had to run. She ran to Auntie Rahila's house. The door was shut. She called out. No answer. She ran to a distant uncle of Yusuf's. The man looked at her through a crack in the door, then slammed it shut, as if afraid death itself might spread. Finally, she stood beneath the small overhang of another house, gasping for breath, rain dripping from her chin. An older woman looked at her, her eyes filled with both pity and caution. "What are you going to do?" the woman asked. Amina wiped the rain from her face. I need help arranging the burial." The woman glanced sideways, as if afraid of being overheard. "Listen," she said quietly. "Her relatives, no one is coming. They abandoned her a long time ago." Amina nodded. She already knew. But knowing did not make it hurt any less. The pain sat in her chest like a stone. She walked back home through the rain. When Amina entered the room, Mama Zainab was still there. She looked as though she were sleeping, except for the cold that surrounded her, an undeniable truth. Amina stood there for a long time. The initial fear slowly gave way to something else, an absolute loneliness. In this moment, Amina realized she was the only person in the world who considered Mama Zainab's death a loss. Outside, the village went on living. People went to market. People laughed. The rain kept falling, and eventually it would stop. But inside this room, a life had ended, and only Amina bore witness. She lit the oil lamp again. The weak yellow light fell across her mother-in-law's face, softening the wrinkles as if granting her a final rest. Amina warmed water. She washed her mother-in-law herself one last time. Water ran over the old woman's skin, cold, pale. Amina cleaned every finger, every callus, every raised vein like coiled rope. She was careful, as though tending a child. She combed her hair and tied it neatly. She dressed her in the cleanest garment she owned, the one Mama Zainab rarely wore, always saying, "I'm saving it for an important day." Amina bit her lip. Mama Zainab's important day turned out to be the day she left this world. As she worked, Amina remembered the nights Mama Zainab had said, "You can leave." Back then, Amina had shaken her head. And now, Amina wanted to shake her head at death itself, to say no. But life did not ask her. Life simply placed the truth before her cold as the hands of the dead. By afternoon, the rain eased. The sky remained gray, but lighter. Amina stepped into the yard and looked at the patch of ground behind the house, the place where Mama Zainab once sat when she could still walk, picking dry leaves, watching children run past with distant eyes. Now it would be where she rested forever. No relatives came to help with the burial. Amina called. Amina asked. Amina begged. They vanished like sunlight when rain falls. Finally, their message came through others, words like nails driven into her heart. Just bury her temporarily. There's nothing worth making a fuss over. Amina felt her body go cold. Just bury her. As if Mama Zainab were an old object in the house. Nothing worth it. As if a human life did not deserve farewell. Amina stood in the yard, looking at the house, the bed, her mother-in-law's face. A thought flashed like lightning. If I leave too, like they did, Mama Zainab will die as a shadow, unnamed, unmourned. But Amina did not leave. She dug the ground herself. The soil was wet, heavy, clinging to the shovel. Each strike jarred her arms and shoulders. Mud splashed her legs and clothes. Her breathing grew ragged. Blisters rose on her hands, but she did not stop. With every breath, she felt her heart fighting to preserve dignity for a woman abandoned by her own blood. When the hole was deep enough, Amina spread cloth and gently laid her mother-in-law down. She placed her into the earth behind the house. There were no drums, no songs, only wind passing through the trees and the growing chorus of insects as dusk approached. Amina knelt beside the grave, both hands pressed into the fresh soil. "Mama," she whispered, as though speaking to someone who could still hear. "I'm sorry. I couldn't give you a proper burial. But I won't let you leave alone. There was only her." And a whisper carried through the village. "She died poor." Amina heard it like a verdict. Light as wind, heavy as stone, died poor. As if poverty were a crime. As if being poor erased a life's worth. As if the poor were unworthy of grief. Amina stood. Night crept in. She returned to the house and looked at the empty room. The bed now held only an old blanket. The oil lamp still burned, its flame small. The house felt hollow, so empty, even the air seemed colder. She thought of Yusuf. She thought of his promise. "I'll send money home." She thought of his absence, his hands not holding his mother's, his eyes not seeing the cold in her fingers. And another pain rose, not only the loss of a mother-in-law, but the loss of faith in someone's presence. Amina sank to the floor, her back against the wall. Her tears were gone, but her chest still ached. Then, in that silence, she remembered Mama Zainab's words from the night before. Silence is sometimes the most powerful thing that kills. A shiver ran through Amina, because today's death was not caused by illness alone. It was also caused by those who had quietly walked away. And suddenly, Amina felt it, something unfinished. Something Mama Zainab had never said, or had deliberately buried in silence. Her eyes drifted to the old wooden chest in the corner of the room, the one Mama Zainab had always warned. "Don't open it," the one she guarded with her eyes whenever Amina swept too close. Amina stood and walked toward it. Her hand rested on the lid. Her heart raced. Outside, the wind moved through the village, carrying the words people had spoken. She died poor. Amina closed her eyes and took a deep breath. But the truth was only just beginning. 3 days after the burial, the Nigerian village was still wrapped in a silence as thick as morning mist. Mama Zainab's mud house stood quietly, its wooden door left slightly ajar, as if still waiting for its owner to step outside and warm herself in the morning sun. Amina lived those days like a shadow. She cooked meals for someone who no longer ate. She swept the floor for someone who would never walk across it again. Every night, she lit the oil lamp and placed it in its usual spot beside the bed, then sat on the floor, listening to the emptiness echo with every breath. On the 3rd day, just as the sun rose above the line of palm trees, a strange car stopped at the edge of the village. It was not a truck. It did not belong to anyone local. It was clean, black, and stood on the red dirt road like a blot of ink spilled in the wrong place. A man stepped out wearing a dark suit, polished leather shoes catching the light. He looked nothing like anyone from the village. The way he stood, the way he scanned his surroundings, the slight nod he gave to a few curious onlookers, everything about him carried the scent of the city, a foreign scent. The news spread faster than the wind. "Looks like a lawyer." "A lawyer? Who here would need a lawyer?" Mama Zainab's house. Feet began moving toward the small house at the far end of the village. People who had not come on the day of the burial now appeared, clothes neater, eyes wider. Auntie Rahila stood at the very front, arms crossed over her chest, lips pressed tight as if calculating something. Amina heard the murmur in the yard and stepped outside. Her eyes were hollow from sleepless nights. When she saw the unfamiliar man, her heart tightened. She didn't know why, only that something had shifted, like the ground before a heavy rain. "Are you Amina?" the man asked, his voice low and clear. Amina nodded. "My name is Adewale," he said, pulling an old envelope from his leather briefcase, its edges worn thin. "I'm here at the request of Mrs. Zainab." The yard fell silent. Auntie Rahila frowned. "Mama Zainab? She passed away." "I know," the lawyer replied calmly. "That is precisely why I'm here. whispers broke out. The looks directed at Amina changed no longer just pity or contempt, but now mixed with curiosity, faint hope, and greed poorly concealed. Lawyer Edwale asked permission to sit on the old wooden chair in the yard. He placed the envelope on the table and looked around at the faces gathered, more people than had come to the burial itself. "Mama Zainab left a letter," he said. "She instructed me to read it only." After she had been buried, Amina felt her throat go dry. She hadn't known about the letter. Mama Zainab had never mentioned it. She had only been silent, so much silence. The lawyer opened the envelope. The paper inside had yellowed with age. The handwriting trembled but remained clear. He drew a deep breath, then began to read. "If you are hearing these words, then I am dead." The first sentence struck like a blow to the heart of everyone present. Some lowered their heads. Others glanced at Amina. I was not poor. The entire yard froze. I pretended to be. Someone let out a small laugh, thinking they had misheard, but it died instantly as the lawyer continued. "I owned land. I had property. But I lost my faith in people." The wind passed through the yard, rustling the leaves as if whispering back the words just spoken. Amina felt her legs weaken. She gripped the wooden post of the house, her heart pounding so loudly she thought everyone could hear it. The lawyer read slowly, each word laid down with care. "After the stroke, when I could no longer walk, I waited. I waited for my relatives. I waited for family members, those who once shared meals with me, who once called me sister, aunt, kin." Several eyes dropped to the ground. But one by one, they left. Auntie Rahila swallowed hard. A man in the back coughed and turned away. Some said I was a burden. Some said I was dying anyway. Some said nothing at all. And never came back. Amina remembered the nights Mama Zainab stared at the ceiling for hours. Remembered her words. "Silence is sometimes the most powerful thing that kills." Her chest tightened. The lawyer continued. Only Amina stayed. A ripple of murmurs rose, then quickly faded. That girl had no obligation. She was young. She could have left. But she stayed. Amina lowered her head. She felt every eye turned toward her. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, trembling slightly. "I wanted to know," the lawyer paused, his voice dropping, "who would remain when I had nothing left." The sentence fell over the yard like a verdict. No one spoke. The lawyer folded the letter and opened his briefcase again. He took out a thicker stack of documents, carefully sealed in plastic. There were red stamps, signatures, legal lines few villagers fully understood, but everyone knew what they meant. He placed them on the table. "The land deed to the largest plot north of the village," he said. "The land with the well and the old palm trees where many families once farmed." Sharp breaths were heard. Eyes widened. Someone took a step forward, then stopped. "And according to Mama Zainab's will," the lawyer continued, his voice firm and unwavering, "all of her property is left to her daughter-in-law Amina." No one spoke for a long, suffocating moment. Then crying broke out. Not from Amina. Amina stood still. Her tears had dried up on the day of the rain. She looked at the documents on the table, at the letter in the lawyer's hand, then at the faces around her, faces that had mocked her, pointed at her, said, "Just bury her," now twisted with regret, loss, and fear. Auntie Rahila sobbed openly, muttering, We didn't know she still had." Another person dropped to their knees, hands shaking, clasped together as if begging for something already lost. The lawyer stood and gathered the papers. He looked at Amina, his expression softening. "She chose," he said quietly, for Amina alone to hear, "not by blood, but by the heart." Amina nodded, her lips pressed tight. She did not smile. She did not speak. She only looked toward the room where Mama Zainab had once lain, where the oil lamp had flickered through countless nights. The crying in the yard grew louder, chaotic, desperate. But it was not the cry of those who had lost a mother. It was the cry of people who had just learned the price of contempt, the cry of those who had once laughed at her. Yusuf returned. Too late. He stood at the edge of the village on a pale, sun-washed afternoon, an old cloth bag hanging loosely from his shoulder, his shoes coated in red dust from the long road home. Lagos had swallowed him for months' noisy construction sites, shifts that drained every ounce of strength, nights spent lying on a concrete floor staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, telling himself, "Tomorrow I'll send the money." That tomorrow kept retreating, like a promise trapped between exhaustion and fear. When Yusuf walked into the village, everything felt familiar and strange. Children still ran barefoot, palm trees still stood motionless under the sun. But his mother's house looked different. The door was shut. The yard was empty. There was no weak, familiar cough drifting out each morning. His heart began to pound not with joy, but with a cold unease creeping up his spine. "Amina?" Yusuf called, his voice rough. She stepped out of the house. Her face was thinner, her eyes deeper, yet her gaze was strangely calm. She looked at him for a long moment, without blame, without relief, like someone looking at a guest who had arrived after the story had already turned the page. "I'm back," Yusuf said, as if asking permission. Amina nodded. "You're back." Just 2 short sentences. But between them lay an entire life already lost. Yusuf looked around, then asked, though in his heart he already knew the answer he didn't want to hear, "Where's Mama?" Amina turned toward the back of the house. There, beneath the shade of an old palm tree, lay a fresh mound of earth. No headstone, no flowers. Only dark soil, still damp from rain that hadn't yet faded. Yusuf froze. He moved like someone who had lost his balance, step by step, until he stood before the grave. When he saw the mound, his knees gave out. He collapsed to the ground, hands pressed into the dirt, forehead sinking into dry mud. "Mama," he cried, his voice breaking like a child's. "I'm home." But Mama Zainab could no longer hear him. Yusuf wept. The sound tore out of his chest raw, unrestrained. He cried for the mother who had waited for him in silence. Cried for every time he had meant to send money and delayed it. Cried for the nights in Lagos when he had comforted himself by thinking, "She understand." Amina stood a few steps behind him. She did not move closer. She did not turn away. She let him cry, letting him finally face the truth she had lived with for so many long months. No resentment. If Amina had spoken, she could have said so much. She could have told him about the nights Mama Zainab groaned softly in pain. The days she carried water until her shoulders bled. The mornings she stood before an empty medicine jar, not knowing what to do. She could have told him about that rainy morning, about the hand that grew cold in hers. But Amina said nothing. Because some words, once spoken, cannot change anything. Yusuf knelt for a long time, until the sun sank low and his shadow stretched across his mother's grave. He bowed his head, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry for not being there. Sorry for believing money could replace presence. Sorry for letting the woman who gave him life die in silence." No one answered him. Only the truth stood there, heavier than any accusation. In the days that followed, the village buzzed. People spoke of the letter, of the land, of Mama Zainab's will. Yusuf heard it all in silence. Each story cut him anew. He realized that not only had his mother been abandoned, he himself had been part of that abandonment. He began to look at Amina differently. No longer as a husband who thought, what could be so hard about staying at home? But as a man finally seeing the weight a young woman had silently carried in his place. "I don't deserve it," Yusuf said one evening as they sat on the porch, the oil lamp burning low. "Not as a son. Not as a husband." Amina was quiet for a moment, then replied softly, "Knowing it now is enough. Not forgiveness. Not condemnation. Just acceptance." The old mud house was rebuilt. Not with high walls or shining tiles, but with care. Amina kept the shape of the house the same, reinforcing only what was about to collapse, as if preserving memory so it wouldn't break again. Mama Zainab's room remained untouched. The low bed, the old blanket, the small table where the oil lamp once stood. Amina did not allow anyone to sleep there. "Let Mama stay," she said. Every morning, she swept the room. Every evening, she lit the lamp for a few minutes, an unbroken habit. Yusuf watched and understood that some spaces in life should never be filled with haste. One afternoon, Amina took out Mama Zainab's letter. The paper was old, but the words remained clear. She placed it on the table in the small room where the light fell just right. Yusuf stood beside her and read each line again. When he reached the last sentence, he stopped for a long time. "When you have nothing left, the one who stays is family." Yusuf closed his eyes. For the first time in months, his tears no longer burned. They were not tears of regret, but of awakening. Amina rested her hand on the table beside the letter. She did not look at Yusuf. She looked at the room, the light, the empty spaces once filled by the quiet presence of a mother. Family is not the one who comes when you have everything. It is the one who stays when you have nothing left. That is family. Some people test loyalty with words. She tested it with silence. And silence revealed everything. Amina placed the letter back on the table. Then she blew out the oil lamp. The room went dark. But it no longer felt empty.